Good morning, everyone. I'm Brian Bonner, Chief Editor of the Kyiv Post. I'm coming to you live from our new studio. This is our maiden event in our new studio in the Kador building on 68 Zhelanska. We're having an energy talk today in partnership with the European Business Association, led for a long time by Anna Derivanka and President Thomas Fiala. So we're going to have a very quick meeting. I have to say that it's been a difficult night to sleep because I'm an American and I'm watching the presidential election results come in, and so it's trying to focus on that and this is difficult. But we're going to continue. It's a beautiful day, and I'm very honored to have His Excellency, the ambassador from Norway, the great nation of Norway, from which I am an ancestor, or my ancestors came from, Erik Svedal. He's been here only since August, but according to his biography, he'll tell us if we got it wrong, his first post was in the embassy in Moscow, then London, then back to Oslo. Then he went to Beijing, from there to Bangkok, and then back to the ministry again in Oslo. He also worked in the Consulate General in Murmansk. I've been there, very cold place, even in August, but I guess Norwegians are used to it. And now he makes his home in Kyiv during what has been, a tumultuous year, to say the least. But I want to highlight why we have the ambassador here. Norway is a leader in renewable energy. I believe it gets 98% or almost all of its energy from renewable, I think hydro energy. So I think Ukraine needs to understand how that happens. And we also have some big Norwegian investors, and maybe there are others that I don't know, but Scatec is one of the leading solar providers. And so ambassadors from countries also have a very good pulse on what their business community is saying. And so in light of the context today with Ukraine's attempts to increase its share of renewable energy through over-promising very high tariffs, guaranteed prices, unable to meet that, like him to address how that is affecting the business community and observations you made maybe from other postings about how we can move to the Green Deal and be more like Norway. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brian. It's nice to be here, and I think we can say that we are also following the American election as closely as you are. It's important for not only Americans but for the rest of the world as well. And let me first say that Norway is a strong supporter of Ukraine, of its reform agenda, and of Euro-Atlantic integration efforts. There's a lot of sympathy in Norway for Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, especially after 2014, of course. And we express this support through both politically and through our assistance in the reform effort, as well as some very substantial business investments. You are right that Norway has a very large renewable energy sector. Actually, the total energy mix, renewable energy accounts for about 70%, and 98% of our electricity is made by renewable energy, mainly hydropower. So we also have, of course, the transport sector still relies a lot on fossil fuels, but we have an ambition that actually last year almost 40% of all new cars being bought in Norway were emission-free. I mean electric cars. And we have an ambition that by 2025, all new cars in Norway will be zero-emission vehicles. So this is one of our contribution to the Green Deal in Europe. As for your question about energy or Norwegian investments in the renewable sector in Ukraine, it's true that some of our companies account for the largest foreign investment in the renewable sector in Ukraine. As a matter of fact, last year, 2019, Norway, and because of these investments in the renewable energy sector, Norway accounted for 20% of all foreign direct investment in Ukraine by these investments alone. I've been told that the investments amount to 1.5 billion euros, and it's the largest among the foreign investors in the renewable energy sector. As we know, the conditions on which the investments were made were changed, shall we say, last year.
Not for the better.
Not for the better, from the point of view of the business. The Norwegian Prime Minister was among those who expressed concern and disappointment about this, because we think that any retroactive action like this is very unfortunate. It's like you start the game and then you change the rules during the game. So Norwegian business relies on a predictable business framework. Nevertheless, the Norwegian most of the renewable energy sector renegotiated the conditions with the government and signed an MOU, which was later passed into law. And this was already a compromise, right? So when we later learned that this compromise is not being honored by the government, and the payments are severely delayed. This is well, for the Norwegian companies, and I'm sure for other companies too. It's a serious setback for the investment climate in Ukraine and in general, and for the Norwegian Ukrainian business cooperation in particular.
What are they telling you now, the business community? I mean, they've sunk in the investment. I believe the earlier tariff was good until what year? 2020 or no? I mean 2030, I believe. But I'm not sure. I mean, what do you do after you've already invested here and not getting the return that you expected? Are they? Some companies, I understand, are talking about arbitration, which would be a very messy and prolonged situation.
Yeah, that's one option, and it's very unfortunate, of course. Norwegian companies have been, ambassadors for investment in the renewable sector in Ukraine, and to go from being ambassadors for FDIs to being mostly preoccupied with arbitration is not it's not conducive for. I mean, it's not doesn't give Ukraine a good reputation for other Norwegian investments.
In fact, some say it could cost the government more if they go to arbitration and lose. that. In the one of the solutions is just to borrow the money. I mean, it's $1 billion, I think, in arrears. I'm not sure the exact total now, but is that an option that
For the
that's
companies,
favored? Yeah, the government has to, just pay it off by borrowing it. I mean, they promised this. They have to, sell $1 billion in bonds or whatever the amount is, pay off the producers, and then cut the tariffs. But then everybody has gotten at least, what the compromise called for.
Well, I don't know. I mean, this affects also the financial institutions. I mean, are they willing to lend money to companies who invest in a country where the rules are changed after the game has started, and the government has problems to fulfill its commitments?
It sounds troubling, and you're being very Norwegian polite about it. I wanted to ask about, I mean, obviously NATO is, Norway is in NATO, out of EU, but the Green Deal, you subscribe to the principles of the Green Deal?
Absolutely. Norway is not a member of the EU, but we are a member of the European Economic Area, which comprises the EU countries plus Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein, which basically means that we are part of the internal market in Europe, and we implement all the economic regulations. We subscribe to the four freedoms and so on. So absolutely, and we try to be in the leading end of the Green Deal in Europe. Something
tells me Norway will get there before others. I want to turn the attention, since we're doing lightning round interviews, to Kirilo Krivalap. Is that right?
Yes, you did well.
I got it. You're an advisor to Prime Minister Dennis Shmihal.
Exactly.
And I understand from reading the news that you're working on an economic plan for next year.
It's true.
Should be out in December, if I'm not mistaken. But you've had quite extensive experience in both private sector as well as for a consultancy company that developed energy independence strategies for Baltic countries, healthcare, social protection, finance, and so forth. And you've worked in quite a few cities, I believe, in Ukraine. Also worked for Unit City, I believe, as a
strategy for this innovation park.
The innovation park. That's great. And you have an MBA from Kiev Mahila Business School. So sounds like you're the kind of guy that Ukraine needs. Can you bring us up to speed then with what some people have described, not the ambassador, but others, as a disaster in renewable energy in terms of overpromising a rate that they couldn't pay? How much has this hurt the investment climate? And further, how much of this new economic plan is devoted to energy and sort of transitioning Ukraine from, as we know, a very energy inefficient and fossil fuel, coal, nuclear power, to what we hope to be the Green Deal also for Ukraine?
Okay, thank you for introduction. Yeah, indeed, this spring, this analytical center was created to help the government, because when the new government was established, and actually on the 10th day or something like that, the pandemic was announced, and the energy crisis was ongoing because of mistakes of the previous government and other strange solutions while implementing this liberalized market. And we started our work with anti-crisis measures, developing this adaptive quarantine instead of national lockdown. It was developed in this center, and doing many other things for governmental programs. And now we do work on national economic strategy, and soon there will be audit of the economy of the country presented, and the vectors for economic development. Until the end of the year, the strategy will be developed further on. Energy sector is definitely part of it, a large part of it, and we need to create traction from industries actually to rise the consumption, to give some fundament to actually increase the tariffs and to modernize grids and to be a part of this European Green Deal and be a part of this hydrogen strategy. So we have actually a lot of things planned. And in terms of renewables, it was one of the biggest actually successes in the country. So if we check for cumulative investments that Ukraine brought throughout these 30 years of independence, renewables were actually maybe 20-25% of it. So we have 49 billion total, like plus minus every year, but 49 million total. Poland has like 250 billion actually. So we are 200 billion behind the Poland. But in this small amount that we actually attracted, renewables was like the big part. So it's a success for Ukraine. And the strategy actually was working. So we have the decrease in the amount of traditional heat power plants, etc. So we cut these blocks, we substituted with the renewables, so everything was going actually well. But some strange decisions and actually having troubles with implementing the new like liberalized market. So we did it like a halfway and still kept the like manual regulations in many aspects. And all that plus COVID plus the fall of consumption, actually it ended up in this energy crisis, which is actually the biggest in the independence since like all other crises, it's the biggest. And it was the gap till the end of the year, like more than 50 billion actually hryvnias, which you can add to like 300 billion of deficit in the budget, and it's actually a catastrophe. So indeed it's a catastrophe.
That's more than $1 billion, yes.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the debt to the producer.
We're talking about the cumulative debt of everybody in the system. So like, you have all these system...
A sea of non-payments. And
yeah, the crisis of non-payments, yes. And as for this green tariff, yes, like if the country wants to attract investments, it should allow to have income which is actually higher than the risks. And looks like that conditions for this green tariffs were good enough to overcome the risks. This legal system which we have, this problems with business climate, with doing business, all this stuff, like in the long term, like 10-year perspective. So this was a success case. But in this crisis, yes, the government took decisions not to use the money inside the system because there was no money in this system to cover these debts, but to create this memorandum and get some money from outside the system, from what you said actually, extra law, bonds, and other stuff. And the memorandum was created, and people actually, some part of the market actually believed in that because there was some like reasoning in that because yes, it's a crisis. Yes, the tariff was high for many years, despite the price for these panels and everything actually went down, but tariff was not calibrated for that. So some people shown some understanding. But now we need to actually complete the terms which were in this memorandum and to complete the terms which were in this law actually, because yes, we do work on long-term, like 10 years national strategy. We speak about liberalization, about investments, but energy market is a very capital consuming market. It needs a lot of money. And this case with renewables will define actually the cost of money for the upcoming at least 5 years or maybe 10 years. So depending on this case with renewables, we can actually define if our strategy will be successful. Because if we don't succeed in this, then it just doesn't make any sense. We can throw this energy strategy away.
what is the total amount of debt now? This is from the state guaranteed buyer.
I don't remember precise numbers. I know that the percentage was growing from like 5%, 20%, 50%, like each month. I can check the numbers if you need these exact numbers. But
it's $1 billion still sound approximately right, or has that been worked down?
I need to check actually the exact number because I do work on this. I finished at 3 a.m. Working on actually a chapter for energy. No, for national strategy in general. So it's like not in my REM.
All right, no, that's good. But the what is the? I mean, how damaging is what happened to interest in investing in renewables in Ukraine? Because, I mean, if you promise something and don't deliver, I mean, other investors note that. But we wrote just the other day about a Chinese company that's doing a wind farm and $1 billion investment and not seeking a guaranteed
Yes.
tariff, going to sell the energy at market prices, if that can be believed.
Yeah, as I said, it's about risks and income. So maybe these guys, they think that the risks are low for them, so they can use some maybe cheap money from the government. I don't know their situation, but yes, it much depends on the stage of investment in which you are actually. So if you invested like 5 or 10 years ago in the renewables and now you have this decrease in the end of your like investment cycle, then maybe it's not a large problem. But if you are a new company who just recently established your like solar station or something like that, and you actually expect for the revenue, and revenue is not actually happening, and you have your debt, you pay for your loans, then it's a catastrophe. So you have a wide variety of problems which we have in this crisis.
Originally, do you recall offhand, I mean, how many years the high tariff was promised?
It was promised for extra several years, actually, till 2030, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
Because there were discussions how to prolong in several stages that.
All right, thank. Well, we got to find a way out and still meet our goals of becoming a renewable energy, substituting the other energy sources with renewables. So this segment has come to a great quick end, and we will take a few-minute pause, and then we will come back with two more smart guys, Torsten Wohlert of the European Union and Alexander Harchenko, an expert with the Energy Industry Research Center. I thank you. When is the plan going to be out?
We expect an announcement actually early today or tomorrow about the exact date of the presentation.
And it's going to be an encyclopedic, or are we going to have a two-page
We will have
summary?
like some short 2 pages to explain it to the people, but yes, at the moment these vectors of economic development, there are I think 460 pages, and the audit is 120 pages of summary only.
Okay, and it's supposed to encompass all sectors.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, look forward to that roadmap, and it's not, it's not too late to welcome the ambassador to this country. We hope you have a happy, healthy, long stay. Norway is obviously an important partner for Ukraine in so many ways, so many aid projects, so much investment that we hope Norway and Norwegian investors don't get discouraged.
I hope so too. I know the government is now working to try and find a solution to this problem. I sincerely hope that for the sake of the Norwegian companies, but also for the sake of Norwegian investments in other sectors in Ukraine.
Okay, thank you. We're going to take a break now.
The Kyiv Post's commercial department provides solutions for our partners' business challenges. We hold large-scale events that feature discussions, lectures, networking, and have significant social impact. We collaborate with high-impact companies based in Ukraine, providing them with the most effective ideas and solutions. We have built a vast online and offline network. Tell us about your business goals. We will hold an event that far exceeds your expectations. The Kyiv Post's commercial department provides solutions for our partners' business challenges. We hold large-scale events that feature discussions, lectures, networking, and have significant social impact. We collaborate with high-impact companies based in Ukraine, providing them with the most effective ideas and solutions. We have built a vast online and offline network. Tell us about your business goals. We will hold an event that far exceeds your expectations.
Okay, we're back with round two of Energy Talks. This is a marathon round. This morning, energy is the topic today. I'm Brian Bonner, Chief Editor of the Kyiv Post. This is our first event in our new studio in the Kadora building on Zhelansky Street in Kyiv. I have with me two more smart guys about energy. I want to first, and I've not met Torsten Wollert, German, who works for the European, he's with the EU delegation, European Union delegation in Kyiv now, but he has, before joining the European Commission in 1995, he held positions in the telecommunications industry. And at the European Commission, he has dealt extensively with EU-Russia energy and climate relations, including a 5-year spell at the EU delegation in Moscow. Currently, I understand he's coordinating the uptake of climate-related issues in the EU's research, innovation, and demonstration programs. So, among his main professional interests are comprehensive approaches to innovation and how they can be implemented by the EU. So, Torsten, you also heard the first part of the discussion, and our topic here is, it seems to be a big energy month because I moderated a discussion last week by DTEC on this topic. The problem that we have is that Ukraine, well, where do you see Ukraine right now in the mix? Because we have the Green Deal, very ambitious, holistic,
Yes.
great, you
It's
know.
not we.
Huh?
It's not we have.
Ah,
It's Ukraine. Ukraine is not a part at all.
And that is
this moment.
what we would like to be.
Of course, we are only one
Let's
country
discuss.
who
All right, yeah, let's.
reminded strategy of hydrogen implementation and everything.
And then the other person here in the panel is Alexander Harchenko, Managing Director of the Energy Industry Research Center. I'll summarize his biography quickly. He's the go-to guy for the Kyiv Post and other journalists to understand complicated problems in the energy sector.
I have to be nice to him.
Corruption in the energy sector, and he's written quite extensively about the ins and outs of the energy sector. But Torsten, you've been watching Ukraine for many years, as I understand. It doesn't look, you can look at it different ways. It doesn't look particularly good what's happening in the renewable energy sector in terms of not delivering on your promises. Also, Ukraine, as you know very well, I mean, you're from a country that's vowed that we're going to get rid of coal and move towards this Green Deal, which is, you know, carbon neutral, lowering greenhouse gas emissions. And this is a country still not, and Alexander, I'm sure, can verify this, still not a market energy, maybe in the natural gas, but not in electricity. As DTEC constantly reminds me, we have extremely low tariffs and we don't have a market. So, and we have this crazy cross-subsidization, low prices, I mean, debts to different producers, people, you know, public service obligations in which providers didn't pay suppliers, and seems like a mess. Can you help us sort out this mess? And where you think EU can help Ukraine get on track?
Okay, maybe a bit on the perspective. When I started to work 100% Ukraine energy based in Brussels in summer 2014, it was a mess. It was a much bigger mess than it is now. It was fundamental questions of whether Ukraine will survive the next winter, what to do. And you mentioned we don't have a market except for gas. But this is a big step that Ukraine, 6 years on, has a market for gas. And there were lots of vested interests, and it took a major effort from the president and the government to finalize the reform, to liberalize the market, including now for households. And we really hope it will work out so that people see the difference, that they have competition, they have a choice. First time in the history of the country. And also that the gas supply is secure. I mean, we are now beginning of November. 5 years ago, at this time, we wouldn't discuss renewables. We would discuss whether we will survive the winter. What are the storage levels, and where are the debts? And I mean, complete. So
Where is to take gas at all?
yes, and people. I mean, all my friends, they bought either diesel generators because they were afraid of blackouts, or electric heaters because they were afraid that heating will no longer be there because there will be no gas, etc. So I mean, from a perspective, yes, it is not easy, but it has been worse before. And from watching from outside, I have the impression that a crisis really facilitates decision making in Ukraine. So and now we have.
That's one way to put it.
Well, and now we are again in crisis mode, but it has been a crisis which has been growing. We have been discussing this, what we are now have crisis, but this potential crisis at least for the last 3-4 years. We knew that the tariffs were very high. We knew that they were fixed where all the costs are going down. So, and it was a very difficult discussion, including in the parliament, how to come to reasonable levels of these tariffs. And we have supported, together with EBRD, the introduction of the new law which allows for auctioning, which hopefully, when they are launched, and they should in theory be launched even this year, but probably it will not.
No.
But then you come to competitive levels of remuneration for renewables projects. So the homework has been done, and now, of course, this government is forced to solve a crisis which they haven't produced, which has been in the making. It's very, you call it messy, it's very tricky, and I think they do their best to solve it. Knowing in other countries as well, like Spain, Czech Republic, etc., it has been very difficult. So now, just yesterday, we had a meeting by video link, what we call a subcommittee on energy with the government, with the Ministry of Energy, and they reconfirmed their willingness to solve the crisis, the payment crisis for renewables, because they understand the implications for the energy sector, for the investment climate of the country, but also for the engagement on the Green Deal. And if we allow me, or maybe you want to ask
No,
my question.
did they,
On the Green Deal, I wanted to say about the Green Deal.
No, go ahead about the, before we talk, and you definitely want to talk about the Green Deal, but they recommitted to paying off the debts.
Yes.
This would be already, okay, they cut them, and then they signed a memorandum,
Yes.
they put in law,
Yes.
and then they didn't live up to the memorandum or the law, but now they're saying they're going to pay. Did they say how they're going to pay? And
No.
when?
No, they didn't. I mean, the counterpart was the Ministry of Energy, and of course, it's a whole government effort to solve this, including with the Parliament. I mean, the Parliament has not voted for one law. Now we didn't go into the details how they
Right.
want
So,
to pay.
okay, we have a new commitment. Now about the Green Deal. I mean, we're on the same planet, so we're in it whether we want to be or not, because the Green Deal is being signed on not just by the European Union, but also I think China has signed on to this. Also, the idea is to cool down the planet in a number of ways.
Japan, Korea,
yes.
everyone.
So it'd be very hard to be on the outside because, as I understand it, the EU has some enforcement mechanisms like the carbon adjustment tax, so penalizing heavy polluters, and also trade deals. If you're not in on the Green Deal requirements, as I understand it, you can get penalized too. But can you talk about the Green Deal and how Ukraine, I say this line, Ukraine missed the train to European Union in the 1990s, and if it doesn't change, it could miss the train to the Green Deal in 2050. How do you see it?
Well, first, what is very reassuring is that we have the highest political commitment. Yes, the European Union and Ukraine want to cooperate on a Green Deal. There was a summit in October in Brussels where President Zelensky confirmed that there was a joint statement from both sides. We will work and we start a focused dialogue on the Green Deal, so how the European Union's internal policies can work with Ukraine, how Ukraine can participate, knowing that Ukraine, of course, has certain limitations because it's not a member state of the European Union. But we have this dialogue, and the preparation for this is starting. So the plan is, COVID, permitting, that there will be a meeting beginning of December in Brussels with the Executive Vice President Timmermans, who is leading on the European Green Deal, with Prime Minister Schmyhal. And the idea is that we launch a practical cooperation on certain issues of the Green Deal, because if you look at it, it's very huge, it's very broad. So we have to focus on things which are of mutual interest and where we can really make visible progress, so that people see that it's not just something for academicians or politicians, but there is a real effect, especially on jobs, on new industries, on also modernizing the economy. And the European Green Deal is a major monetization program for the European industry and for the economy. And we, of course, want to have this also true for Ukraine, and we want to do this together. And this dialogue that we have now agreed with the President is the first dialogue that the European Union does with any outside country. Yeah, so Ukraine is really a front runner, it's a first, and it's also for us a kind of pilot. What can we achieve? What is realistic? And there's a lot of attention, and there's a lot of, let's say, brainstorming even. Where should we start? What should be the priority areas? And we have a number of ideas. For instance, on energy, we have worked a lot on energy because we had all the gas transit issues. We understand this very well. And so it will be certainly something on coal regions in transition, because it's clear they have a problem. We had the same problem in many, many countries in the EU. So we have agreed that we will work on this also with others like World Bank, Germany, EBRD, etc. Also another question that probably will come up is hydrogen. We want to build a hydrogen economy, and of course, and it is even in our strategy papers in Brussels, we want to also involve third countries, and Ukraine is one of the key candidates for this because a lot of renewable potential, fantastic infrastructure which is already there, and the geographic location, of course. And now we have to work on the rules, how to make it work, and we also have to make everybody understand that we are talking about green hydrogen. We are not talking about turquoise and orange and whatever, no, we're talking about green hydrogen. And this is something which also we have to discuss, and we have to see what the real potential is. And then we're also coming back to the renewables question. Because if we can get to the next stage of renewables development in Ukraine, which is no longer only fixed on this, what they call green tariffs, so the feed-in tariffs. So now we have seen the first project proposal, we just discussed in the first panel, big wind power plant, $1 billion investment in the east without green tariffs. But we can also have integrated production of hydrogen based on such projects. We can also have more distributed projects. It's prosumer kind of things. There are lots of things you can do where you don't depend on these green tariffs. And this is what we want to engage in.
Okay. This is a good, I think now is a good, I feel better already. It's optimistic. But Alexander, it sounds good, but somewhere...
It will bring you down.
I'm asking you to cut through the fog because somewhere there's an oligarch or vested interest ready to muck up the works, isn't there?
Could I be a little bit cynic in this case, but Green Deal in real life not about ecology. Green Deal for Europe, it's very clear for me and for some people who work with macroeconomy, it's a tool to restart European economy. It's a stagnation. Everybody knows that Germany has stagnation, that many other countries in Europe have stagnation. And it looks like a lot of people think how to solve this stagnation, how to start something new. And Green Deal, it's a tool to restart economy of European Union. Is it a chance for Ukraine also to restart something? Yes, of course, 100%. If we will jump in right way to this Green Deal, we have several directions where Ukraine could be also a winner in this case, or co-winner, I believe. It's really hydrogen. Agree with you for 100% that both green and gray hydrogen, because from one side green is good, but nobody see perspective when it will be enough produce green hydrogen at all, and nobody can predict when it's happened. But if we talk about gray hydrogen, that which produced not by electricity from renewable but any other source of electricity, that Ukraine has huge potential because we have Energatom, and this company could produce a huge quantity of electricity, which is underloaded right now, and it's very simple to produce hydrogen from this electricity and to sell it. But next question, who will buy it?
Yes.
Because now in Europe, everyone talking about to produce hydrogen, but no one talking who will buy hydrogen. And today market price more or less high and good level on world market. But if it will start, everyone will start producing on level which is marked in the strategy of hydrogen and Green Deal, it means hydrogen will cost nothing, because it's a times more volume to produce by planned market and Green Deal. That now it's very unclear direction how Green Deal will be implemented, because in real life, like when we talk about renewable, just example, Denmark closed all wind projects at all for last 5 years because it's too much renewables in their energy system. It's just not possible to manage this energy system. Germany itself has huge trouble with the energy system because of huge volume of renewables and not enough maneuver capacity. What is solution? France today is solution with nuclear stations.
No. You don't maneuver, you don't balance the energy system with nuclear power, forget it.
Sorry, but nuclear power in France could maneuver, and by 20% of generation capacity.
Let's take it offline.
That's Germany is not going the nuclear power.
That anyway, it's a huge trouble. Renewable is huge trouble for energy system. Even today for Ukrainian energy system, even our 8 and 6 8.6% of generation and renewable create a trouble for maneuver.
Wait a minute. Okay, stop. I got to stop there because you're going. I mean, I need to understand this because everything I've been told is renewable. Okay, the startup costs are high. After that, the production is very cheap, and if you find a way to store it and integrate it into grid, too much is not a problem.
Key word: find a way to store it. Nobody in the world still find way to store electricity. No effective solution. All this game with batteries, all this game with Tesla, something, blah, blah, blah. When you talk about energy system, when you need a gigawatts to storage, no solution at all. Even in Ukraine, where we have a very power hydro accumulation stations, it's like a peanuts for general solution. It's not a solution. And it's still not on the table. An effective solution to store electricity just
Okay.
Go ahead.
I think
not available.
let's go to Germany. You have been there, but you have always been dealing with gas in Germany, and that's Nord Stream 2 and all these kind of things.
No.
Let's go to the German Energy Agency, etc. And because it's a very technical discussion, and we are now, I think we have only 5 minutes or something. But what we think the key message for the renewables is that, well, we know that the crisis is there. We very much support any efforts, including also the mediation that the Energy Community Secretariat did to get to the memorandum of understanding, to get to this law. We very much hope that the law will be implemented, but that we can move to the next stage. And the next stage has been prepared. We have a law, which we also supported, where auctions for new renewables projects should be
Much delayed auctions.
yes.
In real life.
We just
Sorry.
Okay.
where the logic, the current logic of renewables projects in Ukraine is, sorry to say this, a Soviet logic.
Yeah.
You replace a huge coal-fired power plant with a huge wind park. But this is not 21st century. This is 20th century thinking. And we have to come to the 21st century in the energy system of Ukraine. And then you can integrate lots of renewables. Because what you say is 20th century.
So you're talking decentralization, smaller.
Yeah, and why do you have to build it all in Khersonsk, in Nikolaevsky Oblast, etc.? Just because the wind is blowing? Look at the system cost. There's lots of smart things that you can do. Why do you do wind energy everywhere in Germany? Of course, more in the north because of more wind. Because you need to balance the system. And this has not yet been sunk in. And if you talk to Ukrenergo, they are not capable even of telling you, okay, this is where the system, without any additional cost, could easily integrate. They don't have the tools, they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the thinking behind it yet. Okay. So, and this is part of a Green Deal.
Yeah.
You have to think modernization, you have to reinvent your grids and your energy system, and you modernize. I've been to this coal-fired power plants. I'm not the youngest anymore, unfortunately, but I feel like a little boy when I go there. I mean, it's like a museum. You go there, they have been built in the 1960s. They have never been modernized.
Right.
They're horribly inefficient. And, even the switches are from these black plastics, which they don't produce anymore. Yeah. And there's a phone, and there's no computer. You cannot hack these systems because they don't have a computer.
Everything is right. Sorry, but
go ahead.
I want to add something.
You're the expert.
No solution before we will start electricity market in Ukraine at full scale. No solution.
What
for
is
renewable.
preventing us from starting an electricity market?
It's very strange thing. It's a political will. It's clearly because all the time our populist politics said, oh, electricity prices for citizens. Oh no, never. It must be regulated. Guys, sorry. We have market and gas. Nothing happened. People alive. People who need subsidy has subsidies, and jumping in price when it moving in gas sector from a regulated price to real price was times higher than will happen in electricity market. But we still playing this game with some regulations and special tariffs for citizens and everything. Just forget about. Just move into real market. It's quite complicated issue. It's not just one day solution. I 100% have understanding that now it's a huge mess in regulation, some documents and government documents who regulate it, and our regulator also need to do a lot of work. But without this, nothing else will work appropriately. Without this, can't green power be realized at all? can't renewable work in normal manner and it can't be business. It will always will be the Soviet time solution.
And the problem also seems to be there is a lack of political will, because there's a lot of propaganda against renewables.
Yes.
I mean, when the head of the tax service says, well, these are fat cats, essentially we have to, get them. I mean, this is a perspective which really doesn't sound like 21st century. It really sounds a bit strange.
No, but
What is important that, for instance, on the electricity, we have now a situation, and we talked about this with the regulators since years, when even the infamous Mr. Wolf was still at the head. I mean, I talked to him. And he fully understood, and everybody understands, that you are now subsidizing with cheap electricity everyone, including the rich.
Right.
So the guys in Concha Zaspa heating their swimming pools with very cheap electricity that somebody has to pay for. And nobody in the government is willing to tackle this. And instead, they have, as the scapegoat, renewables. Oh, these are the fat guys, but the fat cats. But
in the beginning, the tariffs, the high tariffs, were the fat cats. The oligarchs got in, right?
No, yeah, it's very simple. All the tariffs were installed because of oligarchs. It was very clearly lobbied by brothers Kluyevs, very famous guys in 2010, and they wanted to do this business in Ukraine. That's why it was moving through Verkhovna Rada in this particular way. And all these green tariffs was installed because of oligarchs' will, not because they want to do renewable, but because they want to do money, to make money in this case. But now it's a result, and now we have to, in my personal opinion, everyone who invests in green in Ukraine and renewable in Ukraine has very good knowledge about nature of this tariff and about possible risk in future. That, guys, sorry, you take this risk by yourself, you buy this business, you invest your money because you think about a huge profit. Okay?
So you don't feel sorry for them?
No, I have no any sorry for them. I just have to solve this, yes. I agree that we have to solve this issue. Now it's an issue and it must be solved. But I don't have sorry for them.
You dashed my idealistic notion of Green Deal. Tell me if I'm wrong, because it's to stimulate the economy, but as I understand it, it's also, I mean, the end goal is carbon neutrality, to lower greenhouse gases, to lower the temperature of the earth, to have a holistic, everything from waste to food, to ecology, to green to green energy.
Do you remember
It sounds
Kyoto Protocol? Do you remember Kyoto Protocol?
Yes.
Could you just try to check about perspective in time when it was signed and real result?
No, but there's a story behind it, and I was part of it because I was in Moscow when we convinced the EU, convinced the Russian Federation to sign up to the Kyoto Protocol, otherwise it wouldn't have entered into force. And Ukraine had a very, very, let's say, interesting role in all this. I mean, they were excluded from the Kyoto Protocol mechanism because of fraud, cheating, corruption, all these things. So it's not limited. I mean, this is a generic problem of many places in this country.
And not just this country.
No, of course not. So, but for the Green Deal, I think what is important, that the idea is to combine the modernization. And we are now talking only energy, but think about things like agriculture. Ukraine has a huge potential. And why? For instance, now, when you go in a supermarket in Brussels, in more and more supermarkets, all these, these packaging is organic. It's biomaterial. Why does this biomaterial in Brussels have to come from, I don't know, Brazil or China? Why can it not come from Ukraine? Because people need to invest here. They need to be part of European value chains. And that's part of the game, that you, in more and more sectors, you find these value chains, you integrate into this value chains, and you no longer have this post-Soviet kind of spirit and saying, well, we have to have cheap coal, cheap electricity, then we must produce something and dump it on the former Soviet market. But you become part of the 21st century value chains. And that's the real challenge for the country, but it's also a challenge for the EU, because we have seen a lot of vulnerabilities now in how our economy works. I mean, especially with COVID now. I mean, we take stuff and suddenly we find out we don't have any medicaments anymore on certain things. So people are rethinking the value chains, and the Green Deal is a guiding principle. And of course we want to be carbon neutral by 2050. And by the way, not only as a EU, but as a continent. This is what President von der Leyen said. Europe should be the first carbon neutral continent. And that is also the reason why the first Green Deal dialogue the EU engages with is with Ukraine, because it's a big European country. And of course, the other countries also, I think there will be some dialogues with them as well, but the first one, and we are just kick-starting it now, we just had the summit with President Zelensky in Brussels, is with Ukraine. And I think this is really an opportunity, because, you know, when you are the first one, you can also shape the agenda. And for instance, you talked about carbon border adjustment mechanism. This is still being discussed. This is work in the making. And there are, of course, lots of different aspects like WTO and all these things. But we have agreed that there will be a dialogue, and we have already started this at working level. It will be continued with the Prime Minister and Vice President Timmermans. And I think it is an opportunity, because when you listen, when you are based here now, you know, I'm still fresh here, and you listen to many of these debates, it's so negative and it's so backward looking. It's sort of, oh, they're threatening our industrial base. No, it's the question of modernizing your industrial base, because the less you invest, the less competitive you will be. And it reminds me of the story of the fuel quality, because in Europe we have this fuel quality measures. So every, I don't know, 5 years, the fuel, you have less sulfur and less, you know, bad things in the fuel, so to increase air quality. And there was a huge lobbying campaign in Ukraine and also in Russia against this. We don't need this. Why? Because they don't want to invest in refineries, and Ukraine has not invested in refineries at all. Russia has to a certain degree.
We just have not refineries.
Well, yeah, that's the result. Yeah. And because the argument was, well, we need to protect our engine producers for the cars, because they cannot produce these new engines, so they cannot live. They can live with this horrible fuel, this kind of, you know, very dirty stuff. And that's why we need to sell the horrible fuel, so that we can sell our engines. Look where engine production for cars is now in Ukraine.
Almost zero.
It is zero. Now they are starting to have assembly plants in Zaporizhia from Renault. And it's not the French Renault, it's the, let's say,
Russian Renault.
Eastern European Renault thing.
Okay.
So it's the basic cars for basic countries.
Well, I hope you're here a long time, because
4 years, 4 years.
lots of things.
I hope, you know.
So we can do it. It seems like we have, you know, no choice but to get on this train. I mean, it seems to me. But we have a great discussion here, and I want to thank you both for joining us. And we're going to take a little break, and we're going to come back with Alex McWhorter, CEO of Citibank, and Jeff Berlin, founder of Ukraine Power Resources. Will be back. Stay put. Thank you. Don't watch the U.S. election returns. It might depress you. So,
You are for Democrats, yeah?
I am for the Democrats.
The Kyiv Post's commercial department provides solutions for our partners' business challenges. We hold large-scale events that feature discussions, lectures, networking, and have significant social impact. We collaborate with high-impact companies based in Ukraine, providing them with the most effective ideas and solutions. We have built a vast online and offline network. Tell us about your business goals. We will hold an event that far exceeds your expectations.
Okay, great. This is Brian Bonner, Chief Editor of the Key Post, coming to you live from our studio here on the Kador Building in Zhelensky Street in Kiev. This is our first event here. This is our third session, and today, now I have Alex McWhorter, CEO of City in Ukraine, with me, next to me, and we have Jeff Berlin, founder of Ukraine Power Resources Online. I'm going to right away with Alex because from the investment point of view, the optics don't look good. You promise investors a big price if they come in, renewable energy investors, and then once they're here, you cut it. Sign a memorandum, pass a law saying you're going to pay back the debts, which have been estimated at $1 billion. And then after you do that, you still don't pay them. And now we heard, from the last session, the representative from the European Union says they're promising again to pay them. How does this go over in the investment world?
Brian, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I think it's a challenging story. And the sad thing is that, the environmental, social, and green financing market is incredibly hot right now. There's over $1 trillion of outstanding ESG bonds right now in the market. And 2020 looks like it's going to be another record year. So it's a great
ESG bonds.
Environmental, social, and green bonds.
Okay.
It's a relatively new market that's taken off in the past few years, but it's exploding. It's a new source of liquidity. There's a lot of investment funds that have mandates for this, and it can help companies secure financing that wouldn't be able to do this. They could go out in tenor, and they can reduce their borrowing costs. But the challenge is right now they're not active in Ukraine, and I think a lot of this is when first of all, Ukraine has certain risk premiums associated with it already, and there was starting to be a great track record of investment in the renewables market here, and some really big success stories that are now starting to come online from an international investment point of view. But obviously the challenges are create doubts in the minds of sort of future investors here. When people are making these types of investments, these are massive capital expenditures. There's billions of dollars being spent up front. And there's equity from the project developers, but then there's also financing that comes into play to help build out the financing needs. And a lot of that money has historically come from the IFIs, the EBRD, the Black Sea Development Bank, those sort of things. And now, when you have these sort of things, it is a long payback period for this money. It takes, 5, 10, 20 years for them to recoup their investments here. So when investors are looking, they're looking for stability. They're looking for commitment. They're looking for continuity of practice. And when they don't have that, it makes it much harder for them to agree to commit the capital to get the returns that they expect to get. And if they have to worry that commitments that have been made by prior administrations are going to be torn up, they're just not going to come in. And that has implications beyond just the renewable energy market.
Right. Zelensky could promise something, and the next president say, "Oh, that was done. Not my government."
That's exactly right. You need to be able to have an investment horizon that spans potential changes in an administration. If in most markets, even if there's a change in policy, they don't retroactively change the commitments that were made beforehand.
Now that the damage has been done to some extent, what's the optimal way, or probably there is no optimal way out of it, but what would be the least damaging way out of it looking forward to 2021?
I think from my point of view, it's about ensuring you've got a sustainable business model here. So it's about showing that the guaranteed buyer has a source of financing that is ring-fenced, that is protected, and that it ensures that the renewable investors who are already here will continue to receive the commitments that they've agreed to under the new revised agreement, and show that there's not the same sort of business model, threat to either non-payment or threat to politically driven, tariff cuts in the future.
How bad could it get? Some companies are talking about arbitration, which could get messy and costly and time-consuming.
Yeah, I think arbitration, from what I understand from talking to some investors, I know some developers are looking at the arbitration option. And frankly, that's not a good thing. It has happened in other countries. like Spain and other countries, and it's oftentimes there's been payouts that have been made to the renewable investors under those arbitration agreements. But I think given Ukraine is a relatively it's the levels of FDI in Ukraine are lower than they are in places like Spain. And so, frankly, the damage that could be done here to other sectors and other investment could be more material if people start reading headlines about arbitration and taking the government to court. It's not good for their business reputation.
Okay. Let's have Jeff Berlin. Are you there? Good. Can you jump in and help us? First of all, explain your business, your interest in this area, but explain to me how we have a fight on the one hand over high tariffs, and on the other hand, a Chinese wind farm announces $1 billion investment saying they don't need tariffs, they're going to sell the energy they produce at the market rate.
Right, well, first, just on that last point, I'm not sure how much credibility there is in that announcement, and they haven't started digging dirt yet, and so it's a nice thought. We'll see if that comes together. In terms of our business, we are an American-owned entrepreneurial venture, Ukraine Power Resources. I've been doing business in Ukraine since the early days in the 1990s, and I'd taken a break and was back in the U.S. In 2015, saw the opportunity with Renewables and contacted a university classmate of mine, a guy named Peter Gish, who happens to be one of the leading worldwide developers of wind power. He's done over 2 gigawatts in 6 countries and had just completed a successful project in Morocco that was financed by EBRD. So I said, Peter, you want to take a look at Ukraine? And he said, yeah, let's take a look. And we took a look. We took a very close look at how the legislation was unfolding. And that was really the key point, the let's say, trigger point that led us to jump in. We looked at a lot of projects that had already been under development and decided that we were better off starting off greenfield, developing our own projects. So today, just 2 years after we got started on the ground, we are building our first phase of a wind power project called Dnistrovsky in Odessa region. And we're very, very pleased and fortunate to be doing that with VR Capital and their Ukraine subsidiary Elementum Energy. VR has invested significantly in renewables in Ukraine. They've built over 28 solar projects for over 500 megabytes of capacity, 500 megawatts of capacity. And we're the first wind power project they've done. We're also working with them on a second wind power project in Odessa region called Lemansky, and hoping to start building that next year. So, we're an entrepreneurial venture. We're entirely U.S. owned. We came into Ukraine. I came back into Ukraine on the good faith that whatever government would be in place after the elections and moving forward, even if we look out another 5 years, would honor the obligations that were written into law. And unfortunately, so far, that doesn't seem to be the case. Now, you asked Alex, where to go from here. This government is not so far off path right now that it cannot readjust and cannot get back on track. So its credibility is severely damaged. And you have a situation, Brian, where the prime minister, basically, they stop paying producers, okay, who've already connected their solar plants, their wind plants. They stop paying them. From March through July, less than 10% of the electricity produced was paid for. And there's a mediation process to restructure the feed-in tariff. So it's starting to look a bit like, I'm afraid to say, but a shakedown. Negotiate with the producers who come into the country in good faith and stop paying them unless they agree to what you want.
How much? But you haven't started selling, right?
So, for example, we haven't, so we were not in that boat. Our partners VR were, because they'd already commissioned their 500 plus megawatts of solar. As our other wind power projects, and I think you'll be speaking with Carl Studin in a bit, who'd already commissioned projects. So that's what was going on with the megawatts that were already installed. And then developers like us, we're building already while this is going on. So we're thinking, what's going to happen when we commission?
Right. There's a couple of questions. I don't know if you heard the previous panel, but Alexander Harchenko said tough luck. I mean, you guys knew the risk, and especially you've been here since 1992. You know what investment climate you were getting into. So you're crying about, I was going to make this much money, but now I'm going to make less money. Doesn't sound like he's very sympathetic, and a lot of people are sympathetic to this argument.
Well, I hear constantly mentioned that the tariffs are too high. And it's important to consider two factors. One, of course, is the risk to the country. And if the country were honoring the payment obligations, then there could be an argument saying that the risk that was built into these tariffs was too high and they should have been lower. But the key factor, Brian, the key factor why the tariffs appear relatively high is because the feed-in tariff period is short. I mean, normally you would have a 15 or 20-year feed-in tariff. And so this is precisely after the election. I had sat down with Andre Giddes, the head of the parliamentary committee, now the head of the parliamentary committee in the Energy Committee in the Parliament, between the first two rounds of the parliamentary election. He was a top energy advisor to then candidate Zelensky, and I wanted to hear what he was thinking. And we had this discussion. He said the tariffs are too high. And I said, you're right. So if we were to restructure this and extend the feed-in tariff period, we could reduce the tariffs. And we floated with other industry players, we floated a proposal to the parliamentary committee. That proposal went into the presidential administration, and then the energy community-led mediation process began under the framework, extend the feed-in tariff period, reduce the tariff. And we all could have accepted that. Instead, they forced on us a haircut. Now, that's just not right.
You're right. I mean, now you've invested, you're sort of stuck. Holding the bag. But what was the length of the agreement? It wasn't 15, 20 years, it was shorter?
The feed-in tariff period, and this remains the same, so it runs until year-end 2029. So the other thing that the government is manipulating is by creating all this uncertainty, they're rendering all these projects, say, non-bankable. They can't be financed because EBRD has stepped to the sidelines, other DFIs. We were in due diligence with EBRD and other DFIs, French Proparco, German KfW DEG on our first project in Ostrovsky for the full 100 megawatts. We're just doing the first 40 megawatt phase. And when the government announced that they were revisiting the feed-in tariff, the due diligence just stopped because there was then uncertainty. And if the government had followed through and renegotiated the feed-in tariff in a consensual way, that would have been a huge success. The Zelensky government could have claimed, we inherited this situation, high tariffs, big obligations. We came in, we renegotiated exceptionally with the industry players. Everybody's on board, and now we're moving forward. That would have been a great victory. The president could go out to other markets, to New York, to Toronto, to Paris, to London, to Tokyo, and boast of this great success.
But now,
they're shooting themselves in the foot.
How bad can this get? Sounds like if you have a good lawyer, you have a good arbitration case, and can collect some big money.
Well, nobody comes into Ukraine or any other country to build renewables just to arbitrate. I mean, we want to get things worked out. We want, I've been invested in Ukraine for over 2 decades. I want the country to succeed. So we haven't thrown in the towel yet. And like I said earlier, the government can get back on track. The prime minister took great initiative to reach out, follow up with producers, sign the MOU, put his good word personally behind this MOU. So, now we're beginning of November. They paid for August. They paid for about 60% of September. They've only paid for 10% of October. There are 3 payment periods during the month, so they're already.
But you heard the EU representative say that he was just in the meeting where they've recommitted.
Will be in the pudding, right?
Right.
When you have to ask a question like that, Brian, it already demonstrates that there's no credibility. When you're questioning whether you believe in the good word of the prime minister, that means that
wouldn't the simple way out, less damaging way out, would have been to borrow this money, pay the debts? I mean, Ukraine is no stranger to being in debt or borrowing money.
There are many ways to move forward, and I think it's also important to view things in larger context, because the idea wasn't to put in place this feed-in tariff regime, build up all this renewables capacity, and then that's the end of the story. The idea was to use it as a bridge toward auctions, which would further drive down the price, and then private markets. And what's really a shame here, Brian, is that the previous government and previous administration was on track, and it can be argued that the financial burden was too high, that the tariffs should have been restructured with a longer term for the PPA and a lower tariff, and we were all industry players ready to accept that. So
the auctions we've been hearing of
much more robust.
Well, why? Who's delaying the auctions? We've been hearing about auctions for years now. We have no auctions.
There are 2 factors. They are on track on the legislative side with implementing auctions, but the controversy on the feed-in tariff has really eclipsed any activity in auctions. So, I understand that they may be moving ahead with some small quotas for auctions. And this is another factor. Industry players, for us, we're relatively modest. We've got one project for 100 megawatts, another project for 122 megawatts. There are projects out there for 500 megawatts and more. Industry players were prepared to compromise and to limit the capacities that they would commission under the feed-in tariff and move the rest into auctions. But again, the government didn't move forward on that offer and just imposed the haircut.
Well, we'll see. Maybe then.
Do this.
Maybe the next government will do this. But let's tie this up with Alex, who's an investor, a city who does everything big in the world, and energy is always the big topic in Ukraine, and moderated one with the European Investment Bank, which is completely going out of fossil fuel investments, and actually they don't invest 100%, they do 50%, so 50% from private sources. In this climate that Jeff has explained, I mean, is all investment dead, or is there some kind of hope here?
Well, look, I think there's a possibility to sort of get this back on track, and I think Ukraine does still represent an attractive investment thesis. But this uncertainty and this predictability, particularly when you're dealing with the public sector, needs to be clarified. So the Minister of Infrastructure and the IFC launched this public-private partnership for roadways about a week ago. And they had a whole bunch of investors on the phone, and they were outlining the program. The program looks very well structured, looks very interesting, should be able to attract a lot of investments. But there were many, many questions about saying, after renewables, how do we know if we're signing up for a 20-year commitment, how do we know that 20-year commitment is going to be honored? What are the ring fencings? What are the protections that are going to protect it? So until this is dealt with, and until they can show that there is sustainability, there is commitment, and that they have the credibility to make these long-term commitments, the large infrastructure spends, which this country desperately needs, are going to be really challenging to attract financing for, just given people need to understand that the commitments will be honored for a long period of time.
Okay, thanks, Alex. That's sobering. But we've reached our time. We could talk a lot, but you guys have explained a lot in a short amount of time. So Jeff, Alex, I thank you, and we're going to take a little break, and we're going to come back with Svetlana Chakunova of the Razumkov Energy Center think tank, and Carl Stern, a real investor with real capital in the renewable sector. So thank you, guys. See you next time.
Thank you very much.
The Kyiv Post's commercial department provides solutions for our partners' business challenges. We hold large-scale events that feature discussions, lectures, networking, and have significant social impact. We collaborate with high-impact companies based in Ukraine, providing them with the most effective ideas and solutions. We have built a vast online and offline network. Tell us about your business goals. We will hold an event that far exceeds your expectations.
Good morning. It's still good morning, November 4th, the day after the U.S. presidential election, but I know you're focused on our energy talk. This is Brian Bonner, Key Post Chief Editor. And segment 4, we're talking the future of energy, particularly renewable energy, given all that's happened in Ukraine. So in this segment, we have a really good combination. Svetlana Chikunova of Razumkov Center, who's an expert at the think tank on these issues. And we have a real investor back home, Carl Sturen, Swedish investor, well known since 1994, famously associated with the Chumak brand, but also I believe, according to some wind energy provider in the country now. So I want to start with Svetlana, because you recently authored, you've been following the problems and the opportunities of the renewable energy sector. You recently authored an interesting article with the headline, "Ukraine is on the way to stabilizing the situation in the renewable energy sector." And you said the key goal is to restore investors' confidence.
Right.
Has that been achieved?
Thank you, Brian. We have attempted in our recent research, even more recent research, also to assess or analyze how the memorandum of understanding between the investors and the government, and also the respective law dated July 2020 is fulfilled, and also to find the ways to resolve the debts issue in the renewables sector. So the reduction of the green tariffs provided by the said law is insufficient to ensure payments for the green electricity. A number of activities and also financial instruments need to be taken in order to overcome the payment crisis in the renewables sector. Some of them have been envisaged by the law. First of all, it is the budget support. It is envisaged by the law that 20% to finance partially the 20% the payments for the green energy in the amount of the 20% of the estimated marketable production of electricity per year. Also, the regulator has said to have done the calculations, and the Energy Ministry is reported to accept these calculations. So the Parliament would be ready to foresee all these funds in the budget. However, there's no clarity so far on the plan of how guaranteed buyer is going to pay debts before renewables producers that have been incurred before the 1st of August 2020. It is according to the memorandum that 40% of the debts incurred have to be paid during the fourth quarter of 2020, and also the remaining 60% have to be paid in equal parts throughout 2021. There's also one more source which is being discussed, and these are the loans, attracting the loans from the state-owned banks for the TSO, that is Ukrenergo, in order to pay the guaranteed buyer, which in its turn could pay the renewables producers. However, the respective law was recently rejected by the Parliament, and it is necessary to draft and adopt a new one to replace this old one in order to make the TSO able to attract more loans with the state guarantees.
TSO?
TSO is transmission system operator,
Okay,
which is
sure.
Ukrenergo in
Right.
Ukraine. That would help attract the loans from the EBRD and also European International Bank, but under the state guarantees. So one more source of to actually pay the debts would be also issuing the domestic government bonds, which
Borrow.
is bonds, yeah, in the amount of 19.9 billion hryvnia. Right now, the circulation of 5 years. So these also are measures envisaged by the law. One more thing provided for by the said law is the increase of the transmission tariff against for the transmission system operator. Recently, during the summertime, the regulator has already raised this tariff up to 240 hryvnia per megawatt hour, but it's not enough to overcome the debt crisis. So there are a lot of discussions among the market players about the intentions of the TSO to raise the tariff even more, and also the discussions are underway how it will impact the industrial producers. But when substantiating the tariff for 2021, we have to take into consideration also the realistic energy forecasted balance, and also non-discriminatory restrictions on renewables, as well as the actual electricity consumption of the green metallurgy.
Okay. One thing, you said the current size of the debts are 20 billion hryvnias. Is that right? So almost $1 billion.
Yeah.
Almost $1 billion. Okay, Carl, I want to go to Carl. All clear? I mean, you've had tremendous success as an investor in Ukraine. Given all that's gone on in renewables, do you regret this investment?
No, I don't think the situation we have is going to be long term. We definitely have a problem, but I think it's not as it's being perceived as a fundamental problem. I think it's a political problem. I think these are clear political decisions behind this situation that we have ended up in. So I do think, yes, we are suffering for the year, but I do think that there is a solution on the way, and as I said, there are some few political decisions to be made to put things back on track. Why I'm saying so is that the new law on electricity was introduced in Ukraine on the 1st of July last year. And from the 1st of July through February, we were paid month by month without any actual problems. Since March, when we entered, in the end of last year, we started this political discussion about changing the tariffs. And that went on until, as you all know, until the end of July last year. And in that period, while we were negotiating, for some reason, there was no opportunity to pay anything. So from July last year to February, we were paid month by month, 100%. Since we entered this very tough mediation negotiation that was initiated by a number of associations on the renewable energy side, and we invited the European energy community to help us in that mediation. Since we entered that mediation, there was a decision apparently not to pay us. And then we were paid 0%, basically from March through July. Then we signed finally the memorandum, and we had a good cooperation with the Ministry of Energy and with the Prime Minister. We signed the memorandum, the law was passed, and now we can see that we're starting to get paid again, right? And that's why I can see that there is definitely a political ingredient in this being paid 100% and then being paid 0%. That can basically not be completely market driven.
Okay, Svetlana outlined a number of options which seem logical but not being acted on. What do you see as acceptable to you from the investor's point of view, and how much patience do you have? You don't seem that alarmed. Is it a question of you were making a lot of money before but now you're making a little less money, or does this create real financial hardship?
No, this is for us it's a catastrophe, right? For currently, and with all the points that I agree with all the points that Svetlana mentioned, there are a number of ways out of this situation that we have ended up in. To be very frank, when you say that we're making so much money, I mean, that's not really true, because those projects has to have a payoff time of about 7-8 years. And that's not even taking into account the very high country risk. So if you add a country risk on top of that, you will have an even longer payoff. Now there's only 9 years left of that feed-in tariff until the end of 2029. So I wouldn't say that we have made tons of money in prior, and that's why we're not worried at the moment. The question how long we can take this is not really a question to us, because renewable energy is it's a lot of 100% of the money is upfront, right? When you construct. So of course this is very much based on credits. So that question is already more a question to our creditors than to us. Our creditors will definitely not just sit and wait while we're not able to pay our principals on our loans and our interest rate. And that's already taking place for the whole industry. The whole industry is right now in restructuring of our credits. Then we also have our operational cost. In our case, that's mainly the service of the wind turbines, insurance, and some personnel and taxes, right? So we are lacking behind, unfortunately, all our payments. And that's why we can definitely not take this for a long time. What I was trying to emphasize is that what Svetlana said, these are, with the political will, those points that were mentioned can be implemented within a 2-month period. Not that difficult, right? A very important law is in the Parliament first hearing today, which is part of what Svetlana mentioned. So if there's a political will, this can be fixed in a very short time. On top of that, there's an impression that the green energy is creating this huge problem in the energy sector. I just want to mention that we are producing about 8.5% of the energy coming into the system. And yes, we are being paid a premium, because out of money terms, it's about 15% of the money coming out of the market. So it's 8.5% in and 15% out. So yes, we are being paid a premium. But the problem is not really, at this moment, it's not so much about the green energy anymore. It's about a completely mismanaged energy sector. Because, for example, the atomic power stations are not able already since the beginning of the year to pay for its nuclear fuel. At the same time, there's a huge debt from Ukrainian owns tons of money to the guaranteed buyer. The guaranteed buyer owes money to us. So there is a whole, so to say, mismatch and a whole mess totally in the energy market. And that goes for Ukrainian, the national grid, that goes for Energatom, the nuclear power station company, that goes partly for the heating power station, it definitely goes for us, the renewable energy. So there is a mismatch in the whole system, and I think there's about only 3 to 4 points, not that difficult political points to fix it, but there needs to be a political will to do so.
Okay. Previous speakers blamed populism, oligarchs, and lack of embracing of the market for the problems. Is that what it boils down to?
Well, I do think this as I said, I do think that this situation we ended up in, it has a political background. I do think there is an ingredient of oligarchs against oligarchs hitting all of us. There is a reputation that DTEC, being owned by Renat Akhmetov in this case, that they have a vast majority of the renewable energy, which is not true. Out of the total installed capacity, they have about 14% of the market and 13% of the money out of the market, of all the renewable energy together, right? So the biggest player in the market has 13%. We are number 2. We have in the region about 3.5 to 4%, and everybody else is smaller, right? So there isn't any like a huge monopolist in the renewable energy industry. Unfortunately, there is a rumor that there is a war between the oligarchs in this case, which I do believe it is, but it's hitting a lot of small players because, as I said, the biggest one in the market being DTEC, they have only 13%.
In this is all of us. Right. In the simplest form, I mean, the battle between the oligarchs amounts to those who benefit from cheap energy versus those who want to sell energy for a market price. Is that?
Well, I can say that Ukraine has to go through an energy reform, if we like it or not, because in the end of the day, Ukraine has 15 atomic power reactors. 10 out of these 15 are supposed to be taken out of operation by 2030, so within 9 years. So 2/3 of the energy powers, the atomic energy, has to be taken out within 9 years. And it has to be replaced with something, right? We can, of course, continue to prolong the lifespan of atomic energy, for eternity, but that's not going to fly. Then we have the heating power plants. The heating power plants, just for your information, the oldest ones are from the 30s, from 1937. That's the oldest heating power plant in Ukraine. There are some from the 40s. So we're speaking about pre-war heating power plants, right? Then we have some which were built right after the Second World War, but the vast majority were built in the 50s and the 60s. So out of this, we have the atomic power, which I said 2/3 has to be faded out by 2030, step by step, starting already in a couple of years. And then we have the heating power plants, which most of them are from the 50s and the 60s, but some as old as dating back to the 1930s. So we do have to have an energy strategy. What is going to replace the atomic power in Ukraine, and what is going to replace the heating power plants in Ukraine? Because the heating power plants, just as an example, the CO2 tax in Ukraine is about €1 per ton of CO2, compared to my home country, Sweden, where it's 123, comparing to Germany, where it's 60. So in average, Ukraine's, if you look at the average compared to European Union, Ukraine has about 1% of CO2 tax compared to European Union. And we are saying that we are an associated member of European Union. And we know that there is going to be trade implications from 2025 when it comes to the metallurgical industry, when it comes to other industrial output, where you have to take into account how much CO2 waste you have in the product. So there's going to be trade implications from 2025 if we just continue burning coal like it was burned 150 years ago without any cleaning, right? And just throwing out the CO2 into the atmosphere without any tax or penalty. So there has to be a strategy. And unfortunately, I do think that there is not such a strategy at the moment. And I do think that renewable energy, in a good way, in a well-managed way, will play an important part in the so to say energy revolution that is taking place all over the world.
Thanks, Carl. Great explanation. In this environment, it's hard to see why a new investor would come in, yet lo and behold, I read in my own newspaper about a Chinese wind farm, $1 billion investment, going to sell the energy at market price. Did you take note of that? And are you surprised that anybody would invest in this climate right now?
Well, I have to say that in the end of the day, the energy prices we have in Ukraine right now, although there are some popular screaming that we have very expensive electricity, that is not true. The electrical prices in Ukraine are very low, both for the industry and for the households. So there will be a change of the electricity price, both for households and for the industry. If you compare to other Central European countries, I'm not going to compare to Sweden or Germany or Great Britain, right? I'm comparing to Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, neighboring countries, Romania. You will see that the consumer price in Ukraine are between 2 and 3 times lower than any neighboring country. So 2 to 3 times lower than any neighboring country, including Poland, as I said, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Moldova, right? So we are only, and we have about half the price compared to Belarus. Then I don't want to speak about Russia because that's not really comparable, because they have such a tremendous over output of gas and oil, right? So it doesn't really compare. But if you compare to all other neighboring countries, Ukraine has 2 to 3 times lower price for consumers, and we have about about 30 to 40% cheaper electricity for the industry. So when you speak about this Chinese project, when Ukraine will have to relook its tariffs and put them back to because we cannot continue selling electricity to the households and the industry below self-cost forever. Now, at the moment, all electricity in Ukraine is sold below self-cost. Because when we look at the atomic energy self-cost calculation, the first self-cost, top of the line in your self-cost calculation is depreciation. The second is putting money aside for taking it out of operation. Third is where to storage nuclear waste, right? And the fourth is operational cost. Unfortunately, when we are today calculating the self-cost of atomic energy, we're not taking into account number 1, 2, and 3, creating the self-cost. We're only looking at the fourth being the operational cost, right? Mm-hmm. Nobody's thinking about depreciation because those atomic blocks were depreciated already when the Soviet Union broke down. Second, nobody's putting any money aside to preserve the atomic blocks, and there's about $500 million per energy block to preserve them, right? And we're still being able to use old Soviet inherited storages for the nuclear waste. So we're only looking at the operational cost, which is completely, cheating yourself, right?
Very short term.
Yeah.
Very short term.
And the same goes for the thermal plants, for the coal-fired heating plants, because they have been depreciated already for 3 to 4 times. Probably the ones were built in 1937, they were all depreciated by the end of the war. Okay. And then you have the ones, the vast majority built in the 50s and the 60s, they were all depreciated to zero when the Soviet Union broke down. So we are still continue squeezing out cheap electricity of assets that has already been depreciated for a number of times, not putting any money aside for a new energy strategy and new energy generation.
You're right. That can't last. We'll see how long it can last. I hope a lot of people are watching because that was a very, very good analysis of what's happening and very informative, educating. So Svetlana, back to the question you posed in your article, and based on what Carl said, sounds like investor confidence not there.
Right. First of all, I would like to emphasize, I agree to what Carl has just said. When the industry subsidizes the tariff, which is comparatively cheap for the households, it means that the household or population then buys the goods and services at a higher prices. So it has to be reconsidered, rethought. On the other hand, we have to think about the sensitive consumers. They have to be subsidized, and it has to be in the law. It has to be in the law so that all these issues are
direct subsidies to those
sort
who
of,
need it.
yeah, sort of. But also, yes, right. In order to restore the trust of all the investors into Ukraine as a state, and also in order for them to understand the games, the rules of the game. It would be good to accomplish something, at least to overcome the crisis in the renewables sector. Also, Ukraine has already committed itself to the green trend, and we have been watching European Commission recently has raised the targeted reduction of the greenhouse gases by 60% compared to the level of 1990. So Ukraine at least have to be following all these trends in order to understand its position and also to assess its opportunities and also objectives with regards to the climate targets and also the development of the electricity market and the energy market itself. And also Ukraine is a member of a lot of international international agreements, like Ukraine has joined the agreement establishing the European Energy Community. It is also a party to the Energy Charter. It also is a party to a lot of international agreements protecting the investment. So there is a
Well, hopefully getting involved in agreements will lead us in Ukraine to live up to the agreements. We're out of time. This has been a great discussion. Carl, Svetlana, thank you. We're going to take a short pause and we'll come back with our final two speakers in this blitz round of interviews about energy. So thank you very much.
The Kyiv Post's commercial department provides solutions for our partners' business challenges. We hold large-scale events that feature discussions, lectures, networking, and have significant social impact. We collaborate with high-impact companies based in Ukraine, providing them with the most effective ideas and solutions. We have built a vast online and offline network. Tell us about your business goals. We will hold an event that far exceeds your expectations.
thanks for rejoining us and being with us this morning. Brian Bonner, Key Post Chief Editor. We're in our energy talk. Our final two smart guys, Adam Barbalet from the Canadian Embassy and Sergei Shakalov, CEO of Nest Group. Maybe let's start with Canada. Acknowledged as one of Ukraine's best friends, and in no small part to the fact that 1.3 Canadians live in Canada, and a lot of extensive ties, and those ties extend to renewable energy. TIU Group Canada, I think, is one of the biggest. Can you give me your sense as you're watching these conflicts, which you've heard about over policy, what that's doing to the investment climate, and does Canada have an easy way out for Ukraine, which we've just heard has shaken investor confidence in this sector?
It's really sad, Brian, and it's unfortunate because I think Ukraine did a phenomenal job of attracting investors. It's a tough investment market globally. Ukraine has its own unique challenges, and yet with the green energy tariff and the feed-in arrangement that was set up, Ukraine managed to, against the odds, attract an enormous number and volume of investors. To then ham-fist the response to what I think everybody acknowledges were feed-in tariff rates that were too high, to treat investors in the way that they have, it robs Ukraine of a fantastic potential, and so frankly it's sad. Sad to see that opportunity wasted. In terms of an easy response, I presume if there was one, the government would have already implemented it. I confess to being a bit confused when I see the amount of energy that observers, investors, and others put into trying to help the government of Ukraine find solutions to the problem that the government of Ukraine has created. Mm-hmm. I come at this from a fairly simplistic perspective, which is it wasn't previously broken, the feed-in tariff rate in the system. It doesn't need to be broken now. It's a policy choice.
Wouldn't they be better off? I mean, from the PR disaster that we just had, and not only PR disaster, I don't know if anybody's calculated how many investors are staying away, not only in this sector, but in other sectors, because they're worried about this will happen. We had a little discussion about that with Alex of Citi, about the reluctance of investors to come into different sectors where there's government, where they have to rely on government promises. And Canadians have been down this road before. They invested heavily in the 1990s, as I understand it, as the legend goes, and got burned.
In fact, Brian, if I can, because I think that story, I think, is an amazing one. And it's that, yes, Canadian investors came in with the 1.3, almost 1.4 million Canadian Ukrainian diaspora, have a strong connection, want to see Ukraine succeed. One investor in particular that is now legend came in, invested, unfortunately got burned, as many people did in the 1990s. And then the story became, the sort of the legacy became, well, if Jim can't succeed in Ukraine, nobody can. But then fast forward to July 2019, where in Toronto at the Toronto Reform Conference, the infamous Jim
Temarte, we can only talk to him, yes.
Met President Zelensky and was convinced, was compelled, said this is a new era in Ukraine, this is a new way forward, we can do this. And came back to Ukraine interested in investing. And so the opportunity there was suddenly for this story to be, yes, Ukraine in the 1990s was tough, but now under this government, look at the stuff we can get done. And then we saw the games in the green energy space, and here we are today.
So premature at best. And you're referring to James Temerte, who's one of the most prominent business people in Canada, with extensive business interests and power. Also known in Ukraine for his major philanthropy and helping numerous causes in Ukraine. So let's hope we can get back on track. But I wanted to, I mean, why don't they just borrow the money and if you stretch the payments out over a long period, a while, at least you don't have to suffer, the PR disaster of investors complaining or the real possibility of investors taking you to court, I guess.
I mean, I think for me it's a very simple equation. They could fix the solution and show the power of the current investors here in Ukraine, or continue along, pay the costs of arbitration, pay the legal fees, and pay, as you point out, the monumental cost of not attracting new investment. But the government's position that attracting international investment is one of their top priorities is fundamentally incompatible with its approach in the renewable energy sector.
Okay. All right. Now I think is a good time to go. Sergey, can you explain Nest Group and how you're looking at the situation now, what this does to you as the CEO of a major company in energy?
As my thoughts, I think how we construct our business. We're 11 years old business, and we start not like just in solar station construction and solar business. In solar business, we came just in 2011, and only 2016 we focused only in solar and in renewable. But right now we have a vision, and we know that renewable is totally inevitable because it's cheap and it's good for environmental and for people. And exactly, it's cheaper than other type of kind of energy production. So, according to current situation, yes, I'm Ukrainian, and I'm really sad with that situation because it's my country and I love my country. And I think one of the biggest problem of Ukraine is their understanding that agreements should be done in any situation. If we sign some papers, if government signs some papers, it should be like a rock, because it's a word of government of my country. And if the government try to solve the problem with the money, and in the summer of this year they signed some papers and said, yes, we can pay, we should pay, and we want to pay all our bills. So they should do that. But right now we have the problem in progress. So we're not only construction business, we have owned some electric station, and yes, we have some problem with unpayment and with debts. But I know that renewables are inevitables, and maybe in 1, maybe in 2 years, the renewable sector should be grown up.
It should. If they solve this problem.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter because renewables are such a good investment.
Yes, it's yes. It's depending on money cost. Yes, investment in Ukraine will be more expensive than 1 year ago, for example. But renewable in all the world, it's inevitable things. All the world turn to the renewable, and because it's cheaper, it's better. It's better than nuclear, than coal, and any other type of energy. Many advantages has the renewable. But of course, if we want to be good country for investments, doesn't matter external or internal investors. It doesn't matter. Ukraine should be should be a responsible country, and if the government signs some papers, it should like Iraq.
Shouldn't this have been stopped earlier? These generous feed-in tariffs, generous payments, started under Yanukovych. Is that right? I mean, the idea of this, and they were to enrich kind of his circle, but it just kept it kept going on and on and on until now we're here. So, but what you're saying is interesting. The government, for breaking its promise, may not pay a big price in terms of losing investors, because what you're telling me is renewables, and with the Green Deal and so forth, we can expect to see investment for years to come in this sector.
I think yes, we can expect a lot of investments in renewable, and it's not only in Ukraine, it's all the world. Ukraine, it's a part of the world, and the renewable, it's the biggest growing sector, energy sector, and energy sector, it's I don't know, it's like a bloodstream whole the world. So renewable in Ukraine will be increased, but how it will be fast, I don't know right now, because we should solve that problem with the money, with agreements.
How much money did you lose in this?
More than $10 million.
I wouldn't be smiling, but you're smiling.
You know, I think Ukrainians, it's the most adaptive nation of the world. We should be smiling, because my company got through 3 crises, and we're living. So
that's a very good attitude to take in the face of adversity. So that tells me you were prepared for the risks. You saw this possibility, at least being Ukrainian.
I'm positive.
Okay. That's good news, and maybe you'll get that 10 million back. But see, Adam, you can go back.
Sometimes.
You can go back and tell Canadian investors everything's going to be okay.
Canadian investors or other investors in the renewable energy sector may, in the long term, it may all work out. But I worry about 2 things. I worry about the type of investors. So now you were talking about the Chinese investors in the wind farm. The chances of getting, shall we say, Euro-Atlantic investors in the new climate is I think, greatly diminished. And of course, Canadian companies, for example, are held to things like the Foreign Officials Corrupt Practices Act, right, where their Canadian investors in Ukraine are held legally liable in Canadian courts if they bribe or enter into corrupt practices overseas, including in Ukraine. I think those are the kinds of investors that Ukraine wants to attract. Other countries don't have those same standards. And then, of course, there's life beyond the renewable sector, and the impact of a government that says we absolutely adhere to our contracts when it's convenient for us and when it works for us, sends a signal across the economy that may not rebound as quickly as the renewable sector does.
You certainly price it in. I mean, the risk at a higher price, and as you pointed out, we're still suffering from the fact that Canadians were burned in the 90s, 30 years later, or coming up on 30 years later. And we see that in Canada, not reluctant to help, humanitarian, military aid, so forth and so on, exchanges. Canada understands Ukraine completely, and it gives some hesitation when Canadian investors, still more on the sidelines than should be. But I think this is a good. Is there? You're in your capacity. You're talking to the investors now, right? And are they? He mentioned 10 million. Are they hurting to that extent? Okay.
Of course, and not just in renewables, but in other electricity generation fields as well. But it's the whole system. It particularly hurts the renewable energy sector, but we're seeing investors in other sectors hurting as well.
Do you see benefit in sort of the proximity to the European Union and the Green Deal and all the commitments the changes that are going to be undertaken in the EU economy, that sooner or later, eventually, Ukraine, whether it wants to or not, externally is going to have to reduce carbon emissions, is going to have to modernize, is going to have to pay a tax on pollution. Is this, is that one way out in terms of creating a green energy future in Ukraine? Because it doesn't seem like internally we're getting there.
I think, I mean, as we all are, as members of this planet, I think move towards renewable and green energy is the right, and as you said, the inevitable direction that we're all headed in. Whether Ukraine chooses to move on the Euro-Atlantic tract or not, that's a decision the country has to make.
Okay.
I want to add, if the Ukraine become the good good partner for and with world like Iraq, with responsible to all agreements which the government signed. The Green Deal it's very good for Ukraine, and Ukraine can make a green boom in this territory according to the European Green Deal. It's my confidence, my opinion.
Okay. Ukrainian has the last word, and it's an optimistic one. So that's our show for today. I want to thank everybody who watched. I especially want to thank the European Business Association with over 1,000 members. The Key Post is one of the members. I'm a former board member, a great organization, a lot of business groups and associations trying to improve the investment climate. Why? Because we love Ukraine, we're in Ukraine, we need the business. We who are living here see the potential, not just the problems, and the promise as well. So that's it for today. Brian Bonner, Chief Editor of the Key Post. We thank you for your time. And I thank you, speakers.
Thank you.